Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti, Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, welcome you to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we are here for a special talk on education, employability, and employment, understanding the intersection by Mr. Sudheesh Venkatesh as part of the series, The State of Employment and Livelihood #Employment Debate. I would now like to welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Simi Mehta, who is CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. Ma'am, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ritika, and a very warm and good evening to all of you. This is a very special lecture this evening on the state of employment and livelihood, and it impacts all of us. Whether we are employed or unemployed, whether we are in the policy making or we are in the process of studying it. So this is a very important topic, and as Ritika has mentioned, that our special guest is Mr. Sudheesh Venkatesh. Before I introduce Mr. Sudheesh, I would like to introduce to you our chair for this evening, Professor Sachidanand Sinha. Professor Sachidanand Sinha is joining us from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is a professor and an expert and a teacher in the field of education. And he teaches at the Center for the Study of Regional Development at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Sinha has been the Dean of Students' Welfare as well as the President of the Jawaharlal Nehru University Teachers Association, which is called as JNUTA. Professor Sinha works in the areas of in the area of social amenities, access to social amenities, including health, education, housing, and other related areas of development, especially for the socially deprived sections of the society. Professor Sinha has been a member of the 11th working group of the 11th plan of the University Grants Commission, and he has also been as a part of the working group on the development of model colleges in the educationally backward districts of India. And he has been part of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and various other high-level committees. So thank you very much, Professor Sinha, for agreeing to chair this session and joining us this evening. Thank you so much. I would like to take your permission to introduce our guest, Mr. Sudheesh Venkatesh.
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Please do.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So, Mr. Sudheesh is the Chief People Officer of Azim Premji Foundation, and he serves on the Board of Management of Azim Premji University. The foundation is actually powered by a 21 billion endowment by Mr. Azim Premji and works to improve the quality of elementary education for the underprivileged children in India. Prior to joining the foundation in 2010, Mr. Sudheesh was head of human resources for Tesco India. He started his career with Asian Paints, and he's also he's currently the regional president of the Southern Zone of the National HRD Network and serves on its national board. Mr. Sudheesh is often invited to speak and write on education and people matters. He co-edited the January 2018 National HRD Network Journal on Education, Employability, and Employment, the triple challenge for India. Mr. Sudheesh is an engineer by profession, and he did his post-graduation from the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata. So thank you very much, Mr. Sudheesh, for joining us this evening. I invite Professor Sinha to make his opening remarks, following which you could invite Mr. Sudheesh for his lecture. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and I don't think it really requires any opening remarks. We are eager to listen to the speaker of this afternoon, Sudheesh Venkatesh, and I believe the issues that he is likely to talk about are of great importance. We have been listening about the fact that our education system creates a group of individuals who perhaps cannot be employed in industries, and so there is a great gap between what we really need in terms of the skilled manpower, and our universities and colleges do not produce them. Where is the problem? I mean, that's something, which we need to really look at. There is so much of a skill that is there in the informal sector, informally generated, who really find it very difficult to even enter into the colleges and universities. So where is the divide? I mean, why is it that, in our experiences, what is the story? What is the kind of narrative that we have built over the years? So I think, not standing any further between the speaker this afternoon and the listeners, it would be a great honor for me to listen to Mr. Sudheesh. And so I would rather invite Sudheesh to speak on the topic of this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Sudheesh, over to you.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, Professor Sinha, thank you very much for the opening remarks. At the outset, my thanks to Dr. Arjun Kumar and the team at the Impact and Policy Research Institute, IMPRI, for thinking of me for this discussion on education, employability, and employment, India's triple challenge, understanding the intersection. I am a practitioner and I have no claims to being a researcher, an academic, or a policymaker. So much of what I respond during the discussions will be from my lived experience, though I will try and set the frame for the discussion based on some of what I have read. I thank Professor Sachidanand Sinha and Dr. Simi Mehta who are on the call today. I'm not sure if Professor Vinod Abraham and Dr. Rashmi Singh have also joined, and if they have, I really thank all of you to have agreed to participate in the discussion. Next slide, please. So, to understand this issue of what I have called the triple challenge, let's quickly go through the backdrop in which it is set. And much of it, many of you know, right? Nevertheless, for a quick recap, we are a population of over 1.3 billion people. We represent 18% of the world, and our median age is 27. 45% of our population is under the age of 24. So providing this large young population the right education and therefore enabling them to become employable is probably among the largest challenges facing India today. And I would imagine all of you would agree with me on this. So in this trinity of education, employability, and employment, let's take education first. Despite near universal enrollment, over 99%, in fact now in primary schooling, zones of exclusion exist. They continue to exist. Example, the backward castes are less represented, girls are less represented, some geographies, tribal areas are less represented. So throughout the school system, zones of exclusion like caste and gender and geography are there. Dropout rates among girl children is higher. And in the recent pandemic, with the prolonged school closure, no midday meals, etc., it is expected that close to 4 million underprivileged children have probably permanently dropped out of school. So this is one aspect of education that we are seeing. The second is what happens inside the classroom, right? So student learning levels identified by multiple ACER reports over several years, they report very low levels of learning of children in schools, right? I mean, you keep hearing about class 5 children not being able to read class 2 text. You hear about, children in class 6 and class 7 struggling to do double-digit subtraction. These are common examples, but the fact is that learning inside the classroom is not sufficient. The third, so we talked about zones of exclusion. We talked about lower levels of learning. The third is the pyramid in the dropout rates, right? So while today an estimated 26 crore children are in schools, only about 2.3 crore finally enroll in grades 11 and 12. So it's a very relatively small proportion of children who move on to senior secondary school. And there the completion rates fall further, right? So the third issue within the education is this: only 1 in 6 of those enrolled in elementary actually complete high school. And that gets further aggravated because the skewed school completion rate continues into higher education. And those who enroll in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate programs becomes increasingly smaller. And only less than 2 million youth actually emerge with a postgraduate degree every year. So we are really talking of a complex problem, right? So a problem with zones of exclusion, with low learning levels, huge dropout rates. So that's education. Let's look at employability and employment together. This is a very real problem, and I'll just use some data to highlight this. It's a problem faced by both employers and candidates. 85% of jobs in the Indian economy are in the informal or the unorganized sector, as they call it. In fact, within this, in agriculture, it is over 90%, and in non-agricultural sectors, it's about 70%, right? So a very big proportion of the jobs are in the informal sector, and that's 85%. Informal means what? It means no formal appointment, no social security, job is temporary and casual. And to compound this, most of the employment growth in the country is coming from very small and medium-sized enterprises. The big, large factories of the past, which used to employ large numbers of people, have got significantly automated, and the new industrial environment employs very few people, right? I know of a very large paint manufacturer which used to manufacture about 30,000 tons in its Bombay plant and had 8,000 workers just 2 decades back. And now it has a plant that is 3 times its size, probably manufactures 100,000 liters and operates at 1/10 the workforce. So 800 people are doing what 8,000 people would do and producing 3 times more. So the large industrial environment that we were familiar with, which employed large numbers of people, is no longer employing those kinds of numbers. And the recent goods and services tax has also further formalized the economy and migrated jobs where in the formal sector, the automation makes it even fewer, right? So therefore, we are in this, we are facing a very real problem. Let's move to another dimension of this, which is the status of skills, right? One is employment itself is a problem. But then there is the second issue there, which is, what about the people who are coming into the workforce? Are they skilled enough? And given our state of education and skill building programs, it is projected that in 2030, that's not too far from now, right? 53% of India's youth will not have the necessary skills. So that's half of the people don't have the skills to be employed, whatever be the employment. That's a UNICEF report. But what is more real, even today, and I'm not talking of vocational skills, entry-level skills, but I'm talking of even engineering kind of skills, we as employers have often said, and there is an ASCOM McKinsey report which talks about this, that 80% of Indian engineers are unemployable because they lack problem solving, technical and behavioral skills. 80%. So 4 out of 5 engineers who come out of engineering colleges are actually not employable. I interview engineers quite often. And of course, we take them for their abilities in maths and physics and chemistry and to be able to teach others. And you would be surprised at the lack of basic skills. So for instance, if I ask a civil engineer something about, the dimensions and measurement in a room, the room that in which I'm interviewing the candidate, they struggle. When I ask them, look, what would be the cost per square foot of a construction of a particular kind, they don't have a sense of proportion. And these are civil engineers, right? So clearly we have a skills problem. Problem solving, technical and behavioral. Now the third dimension within this is that the people, the candidates feel, and a large number of them, 60% of them feel that the jobs don't match their education. The jobs don't match their skill and experience. And that's the reason for unemployment. So, we are therefore in the midst of this very real problem where education, employability, and employment have all come together and created what some people jokingly call the prepare and repair problem, right? So we are neither able to prepare people, nor are we able to repair them at the end of the education pipeline, right? So that's a little bit of background on what we are going to discuss further. Next slide, please. So it's a complex problem, like we understood in the previous slide. And I have tried to make it into 3 questions, which I thought are worth discussing today and which are central to this issue. This problem is perhaps not as bad or as big as a climate change problem, but it is indeed a wicked problem though. There are no easy solutions. And let's look at 3 questions. One is, what is the kind of education that we want for our young citizens? So if we have to address this problem, then what is the kind of education that we want for our young citizens? The second is, what is the employment itself going to look like in the next decade or 2? What is changing in the employment landscape itself? And therefore, how will people be able to lead fulfilling lives? And then the third is, how do we address the issue of employability? So what kind of education? The issue of employability, which prepares them for the kinds of jobs that are going to come in the future. That I thought could be the central theme for the discussion today. And let's take each one of these questions and dwell on them for a few minutes. Next slide, please. So the first question: what is the education that we want for our young citizens, right? Now, we don't really have to look beyond what the previous national policy of education and further reinforced in the new policy of education have said. They very clearly said that education is fundamental for achieving full human potential. Education is about developing an equitable and just society. These words have been chosen with care. I can go on, it talks about, both the material and the spiritual and so on and so forth. Those words have been chosen with care in the national policy on education. So we don't really have to look beyond that. And therefore, what does education need to develop? It needs to develop character, of course. All of us would agree. There is a second one, which is it has to enable people to become ethical. And this sense of ethics, a certain moral compass, sense of right and wrong, even when not supervised, being having that degree of morality and ethics, that becomes very important. Becoming rational, right? Which in an earlier policy was also referred to as scientific temper. That's so crucial. Being compassionate. Compassionate, caring for fellow citizens, irrespective of differences in language and caste and gender and religion and so on and so forth, caring for fellow citizens and caring for the environment. Critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving. This is important because a large part of our education has focused on rote learning. Our examinations have tested memory. And therefore, we have built generations and generations of people who are not trained to think. And the problems that we will face tomorrow are not the problems that we faced yesterday. And therefore, since the problems that we will face are not what we have solved in the past, we will all need greater critical thinking, greater creativity, and problem-solving abilities. And that the education system needs to bring in. Communication, right? We know the kinds of problems that get created because of poor communication. And it's about oral communication. It's about written communication. And in today's world, increasingly, communicating through new media, right? There is an etiquette around it. There is a judgment that you use in how to communicate. There is a much higher degree of reach and impact. And therefore, people need to understand how to communicate. And that's a very important ability. Of course, how to work in teams. A lot of the Indian education in the past has been about individual winners. But a lot of the issues that we face have to be solved in teams. And therefore, teamwork and social responsibility. So therefore, education, while this looks like like utopia and it sort of is a big wish list, but that's what it should develop, right? And that's what the national policy of education has tried to focus on. So in the process, what we are expecting is that education will develop outstanding employees for organizations and of course course, outstanding citizens for the country. Next slide, please. The second question. So out of the three central questions that I spoke of, we have talked about the first one. I'm going to the second one. So what will be this nature of employment, right? So here is education that needs to get fixed. Here is the employment that is changing. And so therefore, what will be this employment change? Or what is the change in requirements in organizations and in society that we will see? See, as all of us are acutely aware, this year has fundamentally altered the way we live, work, and relate to one another, right? The change was already happening. I mean, we were seeing changes enabled by technology, enabled by globalization, and enabled by several other macro factors. But it has got accelerated and possibly even reset through the last 1 year. The rise of big data, large volumes of data being crunched and patterns being taken out and personalizing communication and marketing and everything, right? And in positive ways in things like medicine, right? So the rise of big data, machine learning. So the ability of machines to learn and constantly improve and get closer and closer to human beings, and the development of artificial intelligence, this has a kind of a, it's a perfect storm in one sense, which has caused many unskilled jobs worldwide to be taken over. And this will happen even more over time. I mean, it's unbelievable the number of customer support jobs that have been replaced by bots, the number of manufacturing jobs that have been replaced by robots, and in future things like telemedicine, etc. So if you really see this, we are probably at the early end of the curve, but this is going to be dramatic. The employment opportunities themselves in the future, they are likely to be engaging both the creative and the multidisciplinary nature in people, right? There used to be a time when one particular skill you could carry through for 30, 40 years. And if you knew that and you didn't know too much else, it was still fine. But the kinds of things that we seem to be seeing are, a lot of the jobs will involve some degree of work with computers. Many of the jobs will be at the intersection of maths and computer science, and the senior jobs will of course require multidisciplinary abilities across the sciences, social sciences, humanities, etc. As an aside, we also know that many breakthroughs are happening at the intersection of disciplines, right? The whole discipline of genomic medicine, vaccine development recently, vaccine development and delivery, which has happened at such a rapid pace, is at the intersection of both medicine and technology, right? So therefore, if that is where the breakthroughs are happening, then obviously the future in terms of the jobs in society are going to come at those kinds of intersections. Next, the organizations are likely, previous slide, Arjun. Yeah. The organizations are likely to expand the pool of contingent workforce. Long, loyal employment for 30, 40 years in one organization, etc. Permanent employments. these are probably not going to be so true, because the waves of change are so fast. Organizations will also employ people on a contingent basis. So you require gig workers for a period of time for completion of a project. Things have changed, you let go, you employ a different set of people. Workers working in one organization today finish their contract, short-term contract, move on to something else. They may even be doing multiple contracts at the same time. So therefore, it is fairly clear that organizations will require contingent workforce. And the new labor code, which has just been passed by the parliament, this further enables it, right? So for example, it has created it has legalized fixed term employment. It has removed the need for retrenchment compensation for fixed term employees, etc., etc. So this whole thing is leading to a situation of more and more contingent workforce. Next, on this same slide though, same slide. The workforce. So people who are coming into the workforce, because we are talking about how the employment is changing, right? See, the people who are coming into the workforce, not only should be able to learn, but to use a catchphrase, learn how to learn. You see, my parents' generation, they would join a job, and 30 to 40 years is what they would invest in a job and retire, right? My generation is probably doing 4 to 5 jobs in a career span, and maybe 2-3 different skills. But the next generation that comes into the workforce, and the rapidity of the change that is happening in the employment sector, is going to demand that people are prepared not just for their first, second, and third jobs, but virtually for a job for a lifetime, right? So job for a lifetime means what? You need to have the ability to learn and continuously learn, unlearn, and relearn. So this is another thing that is happening. Employment will also now mean higher entrepreneurial ability, and like we spoke earlier, greater numeracy and literacy. I think the country will need more vocationally trained people. When I say more vocationally trained people, it's of all kinds, right? I mean, the conventional definition one gets is of carpenters and plumbers and so on and so forth. But that's not the entire gamut of vocational education. Vocational education, for example, in the intermediate generation, we saw mobile phone repairs becoming a very important vocational skill, right? So as the technology and needs of the society change, the vocational skills required will have to change, and therefore the system needs to support that. So therefore, on this slide, if I were to pick the highlights of what all we covered, this is a fairly busy slide. So big data, machine learning kinds of things are taking over many human jobs. Future jobs will be both creative and multidisciplinary in nature at the intersection of disciplines. Organizations are likely to go with more contingent workforce. So it's, to use a catchphrase, hire and fire is very common going to be. People will have to learn, unlearn, and relearn rapidly. There will be a premium on entrepreneurial abilities, and the country will need more vocationally trained people, and vocation being defined as what is required by the society as technology shapes it. Right? Next slide, please. So we are now on to the third question of the 3 central questions. How do we address this issue of employability? We looked at education, we looked at how employment is changing, now this bridge in between. How do we look at this issue of employability? the new education policy is clearly a big step forward, right? It has come at the right time. It recognizes the right issues. And if the execution is as good as the plan, then at least we are on to something good. Multidisciplinary and 21st century competencies we talked about, so I'm not going to dwell on that anymore. There is a third element, which is greater professionalism in higher education. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about this. You see, a lot of professional education has focused on the education in the discipline. So if I am an electronics engineer, then the study of electronics, circuits, and wave theory, and so on and so forth. Education in the discipline is what has got emphasized. But what will probably be required is education in practice. So what does industry expect? The same electronics engineer, when he walks into or she walks into an organization, what does it mean in practice, right? That element needs to come in for that employability to improve. And of course, our education has to emphasize the public purpose. A lot of our education is hugely subsidized, and all of us who get educated have a responsibility to give back to society. So therefore, professional education needs a bit of a revamp. We talked about the focus on vocational education. Within that, 2 lines. One is apprenticeships. Industry needs to come forward and offer apprenticeships, internships, so that this practice that I talked about is enabled by industry. Rather than just admiring the problem, you're actually contributing to solve the problem, right? The next element in this is because if we connect it to this whole point about lifelong learning, the government will have to do will have to take a lot of innovative steps in adult education. Otherwise, we are going to face serious redundancies, serious job losses, huge depressions, all kinds of issues. So it's not enough if we just fix the school education and higher education. There is a need to also look at adult education for continued lifelong learning so that people have productive lifelong careers. What this means, how it needs to be shaped, that's something we can discuss at a later point of time. To do all this, of course, to improve employability, the institutions, whether they are universities, whether they are technical institutions, whatever, they need to have greater autonomy. They need to have better governance themselves and a greater industry interface. And all of this has been emphasized in the national education policy. And therefore, what we are expecting in this broad sweep of employability is people will have to be trained to be multidisciplinary. People will have to become professional in the sense of not just education in the discipline, but education for practice and with a certain social purpose. Vocational education needs to be supported by industry through apprenticeships and internships. The government needs to help with adult education. And lastly, institutions need to have better governance, higher autonomy, and good industry interface. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. And so we talked about the 3 central questions and what could be done. Because I'm a practitioner and that's the limited lens with which I can view things, I'm using this slide to talk about what do we need to do within organizations to respond, right? Firstly, recognizing that the workforce that is coming in is coming with a higher order education, will come more qualified, will come with higher aspirations. So there is a need to also fine tune our jobs and job rotation policies, etc., to be able to be in line with the incoming workforce. So organizations need to do some thinking and some soul searching to be ready for this. So straitjacketing of jobs, this old notion of, you hire an accountant and an accountant for life, that's probably not going to work. It won't meet the aspirations of people, and it won't meet the changes that are happening in the society. Second, we talked about is we have a responsibility from industry, from organizations to offer more apprenticeships. The third is there is also a lot of recent research which says that candidates are preferring to join organizations that are socially responsible. This has got further accentuated through the COVID times. And in some sense, good workers, people who are serious, responsible workers, are also expecting that the organization has a degree of social responsibility, a commitment to what is often called the triple bottom line, right? People, profits, and the planet. They don't want to join organizations that are tainted. I think what will also happen is that employment terms will need to evolve. We talked about the changes in the labor code, but that's just one part. But because there is going to be flexi work, there are going to be gig workers, our rewards and benefit structures need to change. Newer contract terms will come in place. And therefore, for the people function within organizations itself, it is going to mean a lot of change in thinking, and of course, a lot of change in policy and practice. So that's what I had in mind as my comments for today's discussion. And let me turn it over to you, Chairman, sir, over to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sudheesh, for this insightful lecture, and also actually making us all think about the nuances. And you have so wonderfully brought out each of these aspects. Thank you so much. So I would not come in between you and Professor Sinha. Professor Sinha, I invite you to reflect on Mr. Sudheesh's lecture, and then we'll take the questions from the audience in the chat box. Professor Sinha, over to you.
Yeah, I think it was a beautiful presentation, flagging several related issues, that one needs to think about, basically in the context of how the world is going to be in coming years. And I think we have to be ready for the challenges which we are likely to face. In fact, I was wondering, and this is just a kind of a question that I'm asking to myself. When we look at some of the policies, because, one thing that emerges very clearly out of Mr. Sudheesh's presentation, that, the state will have to take greater responsibility in years to come, basically, and significantly, because, the transition is going to be quite unnerving. And this transition perhaps cannot be tackled by by individuals or maybe by communities. They need some kind of a roadmap, maybe a short-term roadmap or maybe a long-term roadmap, and something which one can call policy, action policy. And what is the kind of a roadmap that we are likely to? I mean, if we are thinking about the future, we can project some of these changes which are likely to occur. Then, in the field of education, and particularly in the field of labor laws, we'll have to really think very creatively, so that the the adverse impact on the people does not derail this entire process. I mean, we can see that happening in several parts of the world in the name of something or the other, but perhaps, there is somewhere, at the bottom, we can see some of those unnerving tendencies. So therefore, it would be worth considering that while we have the education policy 2020, we have the intent of the education policy in the document that is there in the 64 pages. The draft document runs into so many other 400 plus pages. Then I think this government should also come up with some kind of a roadmap, like, in 86, we had some kind of a roadmap. We said, okay, we are going to set up this, we are going to have some of these things, and so on and so forth, 1, 2, 3, so that we could prioritize. Number two, I have my serious doubts about the fact that, to begin with, when we became an independent country, we realized that we were a plural society, and for a plural society to, in fact, have a central or maybe a centralized kind of an education system perhaps would not work, and therefore education was very much in the state subject, and it was rightly so. Not that the central government had no role to play. I think, significant strides were made, particularly around the time that, in 1947, we had serious problems. We had no teachers to man our schools and colleges. And that is when, these challenges came, and we set up different kinds of institutions, NCRT, SCRTs at the state levels, the diets at the district levels, and so on and so forth. Those experiments did not really pay us the dividend that were expected of them. But what are we really going to do with these institutions? That's something, which is very important, and how these institutions perhaps could play a very, very significant role right from school up to whatever level, professional education, and so on and so forth. That needs to be really thought out. And we have to really think very seriously about some of these things. And therefore, I would perhaps look at what Sudheesh ji also pointed out very clearly, that we need to, in fact, have the capabilities put in place so that, no centralized kind of system perhaps would work. There's a greater autonomy that is required by the universities. And what we are really experiencing in the university systems and the college systems and so on and so forth is an increasing centralization, both at the state level and at the university, central university levels. One dictum from the MHRD, the UGC, puts its rubber stamp, and then, the vice chancellors put their rubber stamp. There is basically no room for. And how does creativity come? That's a very, very important point. Problem-solving issues. How does it come? It doesn't come because there is one person sitting at the top who knows everything, So one can say, well, there is a corporation, which is run by Mr. X and Y, and it's his brainchild. Yeah, that's fine. But Bill Gates has become Bill Gates not because of Bill Gates alone. There have been many, many such people, who have been working for him in different capacities, developing various kinds of skills and maybe knowledge systems and processes which are at work. The vision is fine. Vision, there has to be a vision. But there has to be participation and freedom to ensure that the system, whether it is in the university system, that the university structure, which in fact we have achieved. I can tell you for sure that the university structure wasn't the way it was. I mean, until very recently, maybe it has degenerated irrespective of the fact that, we have decentralized and we have made it much more participatory. But, this has been fought over. There used to be one head of the department appointed, and until the head of the department died, there was no possibility of, or retired, there was no possibility of another head of the department. Nobody was being given an opportunity to, in fact, bring about a fresh breeze into this entire system. And we have been in a position to achieve this through a lot of struggle, through a lot of interaction, through a lot of convincing that has gone between teachers, between students, and so on and so forth. We have seen it in several situations that when the problems are shared across the table, and that's where I think, the creative possibilities are located. But what I really see is that, there is that the institutional framework that has been proposed under, and that is where I'm not really critical of the objectives or the intent. And they're in the right place. I mean, that's true. I mean, any government over the years would perhaps have to respond to this. And so therefore the issues have been recognized, and that's fine. But the institutional mechanism which has been put into place may eventually defeat the very intent of it. That's where the danger is. Because, you have to, there has to be, I mean, you can see suddenly there is a circular, no webinars. And for webinars, you will have to consult, you have to take, you can see these processes. If I have to organize a meeting, I have to write to the head of the department, and then the head of the department will write to the dean will write to the vice chancellor will write. I mean, there is so much of bureaucracy that has gone into it. In my 38, 39 years of teaching, in the last 5 years, I'm dealing with more papers than I ever did in my life. I could just speak to the dean on such and such date. Can I have this? Oh, please go ahead. Because the system believed in its workers. The institution had so much of trust in them. No system can work without trust. No system can perhaps survive with so much of surveillance as to what is being talked about, what is being discussed, who has come and who has not come. So the question therefore is that while we can talk about creativity, and don't mind my saying this, we are a sloganeering society. We are very good at raising slogans. You need a slogan, you have to come to India. There will be appropriate slogan for every occasion. So, and we are so good at it. We are a society which believes in slogan because our predecessors believed in mantras, So it is a kind of a graduation from mantra society to a slogan society. And we chant mantras and we chant slogans, and the job is done. There is very little that happens on the ground. And those who really work on the ground, they have very little opportunity to innovate. You are very right, sir, when you said that 70% of the jobs, if you include agriculture, then of course it goes beyond 93% according to the NSS and so on and so forth. There is so much of potential which is lying. I mean, I go for the car repair, I go for any kind of a gadget that I got to really get it repaired. During the pandemic, the people whom I was calling at home, if there was a repair to be got done, and I asked them, where did you study and all that? Although my family members are absolutely angry with me that why are you interacting? I said, this one time that I'm interacting, I don't care whether there's COVID or not. And I used to ask them, majority of them, sir, were trained by their ustads informally. They learned electricity and the circuits and all, not by going to an ITI or maybe an vocational training. So that means, the opportunity that our education must provide should be such which gives opportunities and opportunities of choice. Okay, who would like to be what? But what I really see, and that's what I have written about, and I would, in a kind of society like we are, and unfortunately we are a hierarchical society, in a caste-based hierarchical society, caste doesn't get out of our mind and our behavior. And there I find that even today, if one were to perhaps do some kind of a, and I have done some kind of an exercise on this, that even in this modern so-called industry-based employment, who does what? So one thing that you pointed out is that people, those who are trained as engineers, are not doing engineering, they are doing something else. I mean, and I've been trained as somebody, and I'm not doing that. I'm doing something else because that is where I got my job. Because the job was got not because of my caliber, it was got because of my social capital. And the social capital is not going to wither away. How do we really deal with some of these questions? You know, these are going to become very, very important for all of us. Because, you know, when we say character everywhere, you know, nowadays they ask you, you know, a girl has been writing to me, sir, please get me my migration certificate because she cannot come during the pandemic. Her parents cannot allow her. Because, and also send me a character certificate. I said, why do you need a character certificate? I mean, you have got some kind of a training program that you have to attend to for 1 year. Why do they need a character certificate? And what shall I write about? What shall I write in the character? That she bears a good moral character, full stop. You know, I wish her all the best in her life. I mean, this is, I don't know, does it really solve a problem? It doesn't. But it creates an unnecessary bureaucracy, another hurdle to be crossed over. What we have been talking about, ease of business, ease of doing studies. You know, they will ask you for this certificate, that certificate. You know, there is very little openness, freedom for us to, in fact, make good of the opportunities around. So these are some of my thoughts, because I'm absolutely with you, sir, on the question that, yes, the employment scenario is rapidly going to change. We got to really fix up our educational system very sincerely and seriously. And it cannot be done without because, you know, the kind of society that we still have. You yourself said that 4 million children have dropped out, but my own estimate, I'm not going by ASCR, but my estimate is that even the best of the times that ASCR has been reporting, you know, we still have nearly about 20% of children out of school at any given point of time. And there are pockets which you really talked about. Migrant population may have nearly about, the percentage could be more than 50 to 55%. In Bihar, it is easily 55%. Children are still out of school, you know, in the school age going. I mean, the registers don't really matter. The school registers can report all kinds of things. So therefore, there are multiple challenges at various stages in our society. And therefore, you know, if we are really trying to restructure our education, which we need to, I mean, there is no escape from it. We need to. We also need to really ask as to what needs to be done for teachers' education. That's one area which, in fact, is very, very important, crucial. You know, we have undone, you know, the earlier advocacy kind of a Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan kind of an arrangement of what we call is a block level resource centers and district level resource centers for peer groups to participate. The diets are in very, very bad state. I mean, you can just go and look at some of these diets. You know, in majority of the district, the diets don't exist. In some of the states, even the SCRTs don't exist, in spite of the fact that there is a central grant which is being received by them. So they have to be really restructured very carefully and, of course, creatively, in order that this essential link between employment and education is something, you know, which has to be kept in the focus. And that is where the answer is going to be. And this engagement has to be a very, very important one, a prolonged one. It doesn't really end with the national education policy. Perhaps, this is the beginning of it. And there is a lot that we got to really cover, both also in the area of labor laws. If we are going to talk about that, okay, the industry is going to be made comfortable. Fine, they have only talked about industries so that they are in a position to retain their profits or retain whatever margins so that they can run the organizations. We all want these organizations to run. After all, if the organizations won't be there, they won't be laborers working there. They won't generate employment. Nobody wants these institutions to close down. But then, if I have to relearn, I have to unlearn and relearn and re-employ myself, then, I will require that kind of income so that I can again invest into capacity building, and I can't be doing that if the employment, if the salary structure and the wages are so iniquitous and horrendously, we really don't see in the same organization there are people working on 3,000 to 6,000 to somebody who perhaps could be drawing a few crores in the same organization. So there has to be rationalization. I mean, we're talking about rational principles of and scientific basis of creating a just society. Then, we got to really talk about that, these things, these questions will become important. A person with 20,000 rupees salary, package salary, or maybe even 50,000 rupees package salary, cannot perhaps save enough to reinvest in his or her own education when he has children to be educated. And those children will have to be educated in private schools, and private schools charge you fees where, so what's going to be the future? If we are going to talk about that, then the state will have to come in a big way. The state will have to create, avenues so that, when you don't have much, you're at least in a position to survive, you are in a position to relearn, and not at the cost of your children. Your children will go to school. They also need a continuous payment. Taking loans, sir, you know it. You are in Azim Premji Foundation, so perhaps, you know it better than anybody else that, taking loans and going for education is the biggest problem all over the world. The people have not been in a position to pay back their loans. There have been so much of what you call bad assets, the banks have created, having lent out money and they don't have employment, they cannot perhaps pay back loans. So therefore, people like the middle class particularly is absolutely thinking about the fact. And lastly, there is enormous amount of potentials. And I was just going through some of those older tales. I also read the stories, and this came to my mind that who are the ones who really develop technologies? The technology could be perfected by a person who perhaps could perfect it in his lab, could provide the do's and don'ts and the kind of a brochure that comes with everything. But all the basic technologies which are fundamental, I mean, they have not changed. The fundamental sciences have not changed. They were not created by people who went to school and colleges. They were created by people who worked in the fields. They worked in the farms, they worked in the forests, they worked in the mines. And they were the ones who also contributed towards production of these. They have their sphere of knowledge. One thing good about the education policy is that it creates some room for that. But then when it turns to operationalizing it, it shrugs off, it runs away from there. He puts all the tribal in a tribal school. What will happen to the tribal school? I really don't know. So exclusive educational zones is exactly like, creating kind of an exclusionary basis in a society which has plural interfaces. I mean, we may have been very atomized kind of communities in our own villages, but the villages function also at some level as one single unit interacting with one another through the interfaces that you were really talking about, the interface of science and technology, the interface of social science and humanities. My biggest danger is that, I mean, I'm a social scientist, I don't know, but I'm going to retire next year. So I don't have much of a worries, but then, what will happen to social scientists tomorrow? Uh, because of the fact that, it comes only as a kind of a add-on to the main area of science and technology. So when you say computer and mathematics, yes, that's where much of the big data and analysis is located. I mean, we can't run away from that. We've got to train. There would be people who would be training themselves in those areas. But, the fact of the matter is that the person who is handling the computer, also needs to be a social being. I mean, my experience with people, those who are computer experts, is that they have very little capacity to, in fact, be socially relevant. And if they are not socially amicable to their own neighbors and workplaces, I mean, that's a kind of a behavioral, because of the fact that I don't know what goes missing out there. So therefore, compartmentalization, segregation, concentration and of decision-making process in the name of liberalization, what is not convincing me yet is the fact that whether I, as an employee in an organization, could enjoy a certain degree of autonomy to do something, even though I may be working in a public organization, and contribute towards the society for the subsidized education that I've got. Thank you very much. But I would require others, I think there are commentators. If
Yes.
Arjun,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So maybe we'll benefit. I mean, these are questions which I thought, these are some of my concerns which I thought I'll share. These are not questions to Sudheesh at all. I agree with much of what he.
Sudheesh, would you like to respond to Sachi sir, or we can have a lot of questions also? One thing, sir, I really also thought also to ask our chair rather, that because Sachi sir has really worked on education skills with government and others also, and sir has also overlooked generations of students and scholars in JNU, that from last 2 decades in our economic debate, we are also talking that it's a jobless growth, and there has been so much posted in NDA government or UPA government. And even the a recent economist issue is also saying that if female workforce participation would have been there up to some good standard, then our employment number should be not 45 crore, but rather more than 60 crore. That we see in China, and the world is really changing. How do we see our policies, or even not only from the government side, or how students or youth make themselves ready to harness this demography dividend, which we say in this decade going forward, because also the corona has impacted, and so many things are also changing in terms of technology, and university education also is something which is also going through a big overhaul. And I am saying this because many of my colleagues also who has went to United States or Europe, here no one is asking them, but when they go there in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, they start earning good by with the same talent they have here. So what is also the difference which we are seeing here? So Sudheesh, would you like to respond, or should we have some more questions, and then you can come? As you said,
let's have some more questions. I think, then, they can be addressed one by one,
Okay. Chavi Kapoor, would you like to go first?
Good evening. I'm Chavi. I'm a researcher at IMPRI and I'm pursuing my BA in Economics and Political Science from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. So my question is that what should we as students gather as skills to adapt to this technologically dynamic world? Yeah, that was my question.
Okay, Chavi. Sakshi, over to you.
Good evening. I'm a researcher at IMPRI and I'm currently pursuing my MPhil from JNU. So I had two questions and they aren't particularly directed to any one person. So my first question was with reference to the new education policy, and I was just wondering that new education policy does not really respond to the nature of employability and employment in the country. It doesn't respond to structural gaps there. It seems to shift the burden of employability from the state to the people, where it starts looking on skill development and entrepreneurship, and what this and the further dilution of the labor laws, which is happening right now, just makes it look like employment is going to become more and more informal, which would increase the kind of oppression that capitalism ensures to in the first place in the job market. And my second question was with respect again to the new education policy, but it was looking at how in the late 1990s, there was a mushrooming of a lot of private universities in India. And what resulted, and after that, what has resulted in this large number of labor force, where there is a continuous response from the labor market that the students who come from these mushroom private universities are not employable. They're not ready with the skill sets that are needed. So how does now that the new education policy further increases this investment with more and more universities can open campuses, with the question of autonomy, how do you ensure that this quality and standardization of a certain skill development can be continued? So these were my two questions. Thank you.
Anshula, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Anshula Mehta, Assistant Director at IMPRI. Thank you, sir, for such an engaging talk. My question was that in light of our employment crisis and of course COVID over the last year, what were some of the existing challenges in your view in our skilling and employment programs such as the Skill India Mission or our employment exchange or others? And what are some of the new challenges that have cropped up and what would be the way forward in addressing them? And secondly, in terms of enabling our job seekers through this crisis, is there something that India can learn from other countries or other developing or comparable countries? Are there some lessons that we can take? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Sudheesh sir, would you like to take? There are many questions on Q&A and chat. I will compile both. Yes. Please unmute yourself.
Right. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So firstly, thank you, Professor Sinha, for that wide-angle view with which you viewed my talk, and what you said sort of both enhanced and embellished whatever I had brought forward, right? So thank you very much for that. I saw four people raising very relevant questions: Dr. Arjun, yourself, Chavi, Sakshi, and Anshula. So I'll possibly go in that order and try and give you my views. Dr. Arjun, this women in workforce issue, the drop in female participation in labor. See, this is a very serious issue, and it seems to have also crept on us in some way over the last few years. We were not doing too badly just about 7-8 years back. And what I was reading recently is the, and you have to check these statistics, but I was reading that from a female labor participation in the workforce of roughly 35-40%, it has now dropped to less than 25%, something like that, in a span of a decade. And I was trying to see what has caused this, right? there are several things which are at play here. The one explanation, which I'm not too sure of, but an explanation that has been offered is that with Manrega and increased incomes of the household, the need for women to participate in work has possibly reduced. And therefore, in an Indian society where, there is some prestige associated with the woman being at home, it has possibly as a byproduct of that, it has possibly led to this lesser number of women in the workforce. The second is, the safety at the workplace, which is more in the context of organized workforce, but still, safety at the workplace has also started playing up. So the difficulty in the commute, harassment, and other things that people face, probably that is also a second reason why there is a dip. Now, the consequence of all this is that despite a higher proportion of women getting better education, in fact, people tell me that today, if you go to a medical college, there are more women than men, and particularly in disciplines like, of course, gynecology was always there, but even if you take radiology and so on and so forth, it's almost entirely women. So, despite a greater proportion of women coming in through the education system, we are not able to tap the productive force of that because of the other issues that are there. And therefore, like you mentioned, both the participation and therefore the resultant GDP are both lower. So this issue has to be addressed. It is important, but I don't think it has got the necessary attention. Now, coming to Chavi's question, which is more a here and now question on what are the skills that students will need to be employable in this workforce. You see, some of the skills or abilities will be, they are time tested and they will continue to remain important, right? Language, numeracy, hard work, social skills. I mean, these are, without any doubt, they will continue to remain important. But I think if you sort of look at it as a set of competencies, which is knowledge, skills, and behaviors, if you look at all three, then knowledge, of course, in the discipline that you are in, you will have to develop a very deep degree of expertise. And so, as some people call it, you need to have that kind of a T, which is, you need to be reasonably wide and very deep in one area. So knowledge, of course, skills, like I spoke of, analytical problem solving, data, skills with data, these will be very, very important. I can't think of a job today which doesn't have data management abilities. And then behaviors, right? Behaviors is about, see, people may land a job, but if you have to hold a job, you need the right kind of behaviors. And those behaviors are about teamwork, hard work, being reliable, responsive, empathetic to your colleagues, etc., etc. So this is probably the package that one will have to develop. Sakshi, to your question, you had two questions. Your first one sort of said that the NEP doesn't respond to the employability issue, and perhaps that was not the mandate also of the NEP. The NEP has taken its responsibility of preparing good citizens, preparing, but the responsibility of converting that into employment, that bridge that we spoke of, was not entirely on the NEP. I mean, I'm speculating that they didn't see it as necessarily their mandate. Although there is, of course, a chapter on skills, on vocational education. They talk about how education has to prepare the future workforce, but that was not the central theme for the NEP, is my sense. The second part of your question was, there was a mushrooming of private universities. They have created many not so employable people. And in this quest for autonomy, in this drive for autonomy, will we lose out on standardization and quality? There is, I think, an assumption in that question which needs to be challenged, right? You see, the issue with Indian education, as I see it, particularly with private universities, is it is an asymptotic curve. At the top 5-10%, you have very high quality institutions with very high quality people coming out, and then it drops off very sharply, right? So when you say private universities, for example, if I take Ashoka, or if I take Flame, or if I take Azim Premji University, or any of these, right? They are as good as the very best universities, right? So the people who are coming out of those institutions are certainly employable, and they are getting good jobs. They will continue to get good jobs. But then there is this sharp drop. And the worry is that this sharp drop in the quality of many who have sort of got into education with probably not the right intent, and they don't have an imagination and vision for education of the kind that you and I speak of. That's the reality. And that needs to get fixed. Now, autonomy doesn't come without any responsibility. The NEP talks a bit about, how these governance systems need to be established, what kind of regulatory processes need to be in place, what is the consequence of poor governance, etc. So I think there are checks and balances that have been built in. Of course, it all depends on how things get executed on the ground. Anshula, you had two questions. One was what has happened to the landscape of skilling during this whole COVID crisis? And the second is, are there any lessons from other countries that we can take? Now, on this first one, on skilling during COVID, my sense is that people took a pause. I didn't see too much of a drive from the government and from other organizations either. And it was such a bolt from the blue that I think a lot of people were stunned into some kind of inactivity. So my own feeling is this drive on skilling has possibly taken a bit of a backseat in the last 10-12 months. And whether it is the skill development centers, or whether it is the way people have looked at it, my own feeling is there is a bit of a pause on that, and this may cost us a bit in the coming few years. In terms of lessons from other countries, I honestly don't have too much to share, partly because, ours is a very unique situation. One can talk about examples like, the Scandinavian countries and so on and so forth, which have had such wonderful human development indices, such wonderful education, such equitable distribution of wealth, etc. But, none of that will apply in our context, right? We have to discover our own solutions. I mean, we are different in so many different ways. We are a complex country. We have so many different languages. Our per capita income is so low. Our population is so high, and such a young population, etc., etc. So I honestly don't know. Maybe the others on this discussion today have better insights. I honestly don't know if there is a comparable model that can be copied. Even the examples of the Asian tiger economies, which sort of achieved some remarkable progress, I don't think really applies to a country as complex as ours. So those are my responses, Dr. Arjun Kumar.
Yes, sir. In fact, In the Narega program also during the COVID, we have tried to train many people for manual work also. And there is also scheme, but people are really not turning up for that. The number still remains very low. And I would say, sir, as you were also mentioning that apart from there is a heavy top class institution and there is a fall, so this fallback has also been seen in our skill program as per retention rate, or as we see most of our universities or other places also, the placement becomes very important, and there is a fallback. So what do you think, as you mentioned that reliability, hard work, there are so many factors, these things are falling back. We are not able to hold it together in most of our programs. Is it because of the program design, or how, be it in private sector or even the government programs, why is it having so many of fallback, or we are not thinking mid to long term, or what is it in the planning that you see in your experience, especially in R&D sector, this is happening time and again?
Would you want me to respond right now, or you have another set of questions? I'll go by the chairman's direction on this.
Okay, okay. We have Nikhil joining from Goa. Nikhil, would you like quickly to ask? Yes.
Good evening, sir. I'm Nikhil, a researcher at IMPRI, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I'll address my first question to Sudheesh, sir. It's basically on the concept of blended learning. Now, this was something that started appearing on the horizon about 4 or 5 years ago through edX and such platforms, which started providing online access to various upskilling programs and topics. And the pandemic, you can say, has quite hastened this process of accepting this blended learning concept. So now I came across many academicians who said that from now on there won't be a complete retract back to the old system, and what we'll be having is a blended concept of on-campus learning with online learning. So this online learning gives us access to maybe tools like simulation and several other aspects where we can have a better overview of concept that we are as students as would be learning. So how do you think such a system of teaching would apply in the Indian context? We have many issues. We have accessibility issues. We have internet access issues, penetration issues. So how do you see this India leveraging this to improve the quality of education and thereby improving overall employability and employment as such? My second question would be addressed to Sachidanand, sir. Sir, you mentioned about training, teachers training. So I wanted to clarify whether did you mean improving the quality of the teacher training institutions like B.Ed colleges, or did you mean a continuous upskilling and capacity building of the teachers who are employed? So in that
I think we lost Nikhil, but we got the gist of it. Yes. Yes. Sachi sir, you are on mute. Yes.
Yeah. Nikhil, we lost you. Can you hear me? No, I think we have lost him completely. Yeah. So the others, Sakshi and...
So there are many questions in the Q&A box. One is that Nilkamal, PhD research scholar from Central University of Gujarat, asking that what is the how interdisciplinary education systems deal with learning and employment. And then there is a question by Anonymous that what is the point of it introducing more and more new pedagogies, CC, CBCS and others, when teachers are themselves overburdened and clueless about new subjects and methods. So teachers, the point Sachi sir was also making. One question is on the startups and the role on entrepreneurship. And then there is also the practices by some of the private institutes also for the money and other charges. A lot of those things also coming in offline, online mode. One question is to Sachi sir, that the role of the private sector as job creators and having all the things on them, because there is job security, directive of state policy, equal wages, all the state related things. Also some question is there on caste based discrimination. in all the institutions that is also there. And this one question where your interest should lie and where your job is. One question is that also. And then one few more questions are there on AI, AR, VR, and on technology, and that how that technology can also be leveraged for employment and education purposes. So there are many online job fairs also happening to replace employment exchange and other things, but for, I would say, very manual jobs. And one question is also relating to job satisfaction, assertiveness, and even the lack of employment continues to plague graduates. Should job seekers be trained and expect more from the workplace? Then one is on NEP. Yes, largely also upon the drag and what the employment scenario is leading. Simi, do you have any question? Would you like to ask anything?
No, thank you, Arjun. Basically, my question was also very much aligned to one question that has been asked on the gig work. Do you think that there has to be special educational training before the students actually think of joining a gig or a platform economy in their career as a career prospect? And also, in fact, I have a very incidentally, I have a magazine with me which by a business house which says the new way to empower education, and they are calling upon schools and colleges, schools especially, that they want to get the students of class 11 and 12 so that they train them for excellent results in sciences or in medical or engineering examinations. What about their class 12 examinations? And then parents are unable to pay the huge amounts of money. Then there is a lot of gap that has been created or that is being created. They really charge a lot of money, and so then people are at the receiving end, the students who come from the deprived sections of the society. So this, what kind of education setup are we creating for our next generation of people who will be employed? We cannot just rely upon creation of startups, that startups will be employment generators. Of course they can be, they will be, but is it like government washing their hands off from their responsibility of providing decent jobs? And where is the gender picture over here? Everybody is talking about jobs and education, but it further creates a lot of gap, I would say, in terms of caste-based and gender-based discrimination. So this is what I wanted to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Simi. Lastly, I just wanted to add one question, because China, US, Europe, other places also, and sir also mentioned about East Asian economies. So do you see that in terms of our education and employability, something called performance-based or promotion-based, that kind of incentive we can cultivate also in our education or workplace, which essentially have, like in our university, we have continuing education, lifelong education, those sort of things also to inculcate at workplaces or at entry level also for education and employment? Or do you really see the potential of national apprenticeship policy to be very useful as we see? So this is
Yeah, so I call upon Sudheesh ji to reflect give his views on these questions.
Okay, there's a wide sweep of questions there. I'll take a few of them, and maybe combine a couple of them as well. So, Dr. Arjun Kumar, your questions, one on the falling standards and what can be done about it, and people are possibly not as hardworking as before, and they don't hold down a job, etc., etc. Well, that is an issue of character, right? And I highlighted that as an element of the education that we need to bring in people. And if we don't set right at that level on what are the values that one should have to lead a good life, and that leading a good life has employment in it, it has earning in it, it has family in it, it has so many other things. If we don't fix that, then we are not going to reap much social benefit. So I can only say that, look, I agree with you. There is a certain fall in standards, and it's across, in standards of integrity, in standards of our conduct, and in some of our values. So obviously we are paying a price for that. And one way to fix it is in education, but there is a lot more that needs to happen. Will there be a performance-based culture that will come? Well, I would think, we won't go to that extreme of a perform or perish kind of a culture, but we won't be as timid on expecting performance as sometimes we are as a country, right? So we are possibly going to move the needle a bit, and it will settle somewhere in between. But it is but natural that a greater performance orientation will come in everything, including public systems. The necessity for higher service, and with the way in which things are going to get privatized and all of that, this is possibly an inevitable outcome. So that's about what I had for your questions, Arjun. Nikhil, this blended learning thing is, I'm very happy that you brought it out. Is this the future? You see, I think we have also sort of, in the last 12 months, learned quite a bit and quite rapidly. When the outbreak of the pandemic happened, there were a lot of people who thought that, online learning is going to solve every problem, right? And suddenly, people thought that, look, we could have done this all along. Look at the reach that we are able to have, etc., etc. But very quickly, the limitations of online learning also became very visible, right? The fact that teaching is a bidirectional engagement, the fact that experimentation doesn't work in online medium, there are serious issues of access, etc., etc. So people got a little disillusioned with online learning. So therefore, from September onwards, I'm seeing this drive towards a blended learning, right? And I'm taking a broad sweep. There are issues. One can talk about nuances in school education, higher education, adult education, in-company training, how blended learning works in each of this. But if I take one broad sweep at this, then, I think there are both benefits and concerns. The biggest benefits that I see are that, this reach is just phenomenal. Learning has become asynchronous. You can learn at your pace, your time. You can learn from the best. Today you are probably in another town and Dr. Sachidanand Sinha is in another town, and you are able to learn from his wisdom and experience only because of this medium, right? So this is now happening big time. So there are clear benefits, but there are also concerns. And the concerns, to my mind at this point, are primarily around access. It is said that 36% of India's children didn't have any phone. So where is the question of any online learning in education, right? So they didn't have any education. And so for blended to work, you need to solve the issue of access, right? And I also think, the blended should have a good proportion of both online and real learning. Real learning because, we all know, many of you are JNU products. I stayed in a hostel as part of my education. A lot of the learning is what you pick up through engagement with people, right? It's about the discussions that happen in the corridors, in the cafeteria, and the debates and the perspectives that you observe. That's not going to happen online. So, so blended is the future, no doubt. It has to combine the benefits of online and the benefits of offline. One should not swing to either extreme. That's my sense. There were a few questions on what's the point of new pedagogies, interdisciplinary work. I'll pass those in the interest of time, but I'll take one which had something about interest and job expectations, right? I have a specific set of interests and capabilities, but the job doesn't satisfy that. That kind of a feel was there in that question. Now, you see, we are never going to get what exactly we like. It's all nice to say that, you should choose what you like and stuff like that, but you should also like what you are given. In organizations, you are valued for also doing the grunt work. It's not always fancy and nice work that you will get. Your aspirations may be different, but there is a way that you there is a pathway to that. And the pathway is, there is a lot of hard yards that you will have to do with the grunt work, be happy with what you've got, have the resilience, and only then you will get on to do things that you like to do. Many people tell me in the world of software that, they don't want to do, this was in a time when there was testing and development and architecture and so on and so forth. Nobody wants to do testing, right? I mean, they all think that, they want to be architects, technology architects. Now you won't get a technology architecture job unless you have understood the paths of testing and support and development, number one. Number two, those technology architecture jobs are far fewer. You might be interested, but the reality is that there are not too many of those. So, when we talk about interests and job expectations, I would bring a degree of, balance into this expectation. I'll just take a couple of other ones. Dr. Simi, your questions. This whole aspect of inequities which have got aggravated through this private coaching, I'm very concerned about it, and I don't know what is the answer. You see, on one hand, we have a country thirsting for education. Education meaning of the kind that will help you clear competitive examinations and so on and so forth. So this huge enrollment that you see right from class 5 onwards up to class 12 most certainly, and even thereafter, of people enrolling in private coaching institutions, whether it is a FITG or whether it is an Akash or whatever, and look at the kinds of valuations that these organizations have got. This is reflective of the need in Indian society for such opportunities. But then my worry is that exactly what you said, which is, how many people can afford it? And what happens to the backbone of the Indian school education system? If the private coaching is what becomes the dominant way of learning, then what about this backbone of the Indian public education system? And what about people who don't have access? Now, if there is an entire group of people who are coming better prepared for jobs, and there is a whole group that is getting excluded, which is the majority, then you can see how the fault lines are getting exposed, right? So this is a serious issue, and I really don't know what else I could say at this point. And to your question on startups, yeah, I think that's also sort of exaggerated. The number of jobs that startups will create, and they are going to be employing all our people, I think is also hugely exaggerated. Yes, they are going to create a lot of jobs, no doubt, but I would bet a lot more on individual entrepreneurship of people, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, particularly in the services sector, creating jobs. But this fancy technology startups creating jobs is not something which I am betting too much on. They will, of course, change things. They will, of course, bring new ways of working. But I don't think they are going to create as many jobs. Those were a few comments. Back to you.
Yes, sir. Yes. On just because we were
No,
on.
before you start, Arjun, can I just add to what Sudheesh ji just said? We got to really on the question that was raised by Simi. I think let us look at it in some kind of historical context. It's like this, I'm bringing in this historicity precisely because of the fact that it may help us answer some of the questions, or maybe help us understand the pathways that we have traveled. One is that, in early 60s, there were very few, what you call the tutorial courses or coaching classes, because, the admissions in majority of these institutions were not based on any kind of a competition. They were based on marks, so gradually, you have these competitive examinations coming in for entrance and all that. And it's very important that we should also look at as to how the competitive examinations and the nature of the competitive examinations have shaped the course of what we call these coaching institutions, or these coaching institutions have shaped the course of the competitive examination. I can tell you that. And if you look into it, because I work on curriculums, and if we were to perhaps look at the curriculum, not so much in social sciences, but in sciences, and I have sat with people who are from physics, chemistry, and so on and so forth, we say that for admission into IITs or maybe admission into engineering programs is going to be based on your knowledge of class 12th, isn't it? That's the kind of a line of, and the kind of questions which are asked in the joint engineering examinations, they cannot be solved by students who have, if you have that normal, what you can call it, the average student in mind, and then you really frame questions in order to get the best out of it, best of the lots. In any scoring, any kind of a competitive examination, there would always be scores which will fluctuate across. But the whole idea is not simply the coaching institutions. I think there's much deeper. The deeper social divide, the deeper class bias is also part of it. And I'm absolutely clear as to how, we have been raising the bar and been creating difficulties for large number of people who perhaps could now be seen. One cannot say that, our education system failed because it didn't really provide so much of mobility. If you look into numbers, and not so much in proportion, if you look into numbers, it has really provided opportunities to fairly large number of people who perhaps wouldn't have had the opportunity. And it has cut across various strata. Just imagine, I will give you the NSS figure of 2004, 2005, when the poorest among the agricultural community, this is the unit level data, which we did work on for the UGC. The enrollment in higher education was 0.5%. That was the GER, gross enrollment ratio was 0.5% of those who came from an agricultural labor background and was poor, right? What is the situation today? Today it is close to over 7.5. So therefore, even within this particular period, in just about 15 years time, one can see that there has been a fairly good amount of progress. Not in comparison to what has happened, because, the gap between the poor and the non-poor is pretty huge. For the high caste person, it is close to about 62%. GER is close to 62%. Much better than what you have somewhere in the Western parts of the world also, right? So that's the point that I'm really trying to say is that, we got to really look at three things. One, as to how, the system could perhaps be honest enough to test students on the basis of their strengths. The system doesn't test students on the basis of their strengths. The system really asks questions which is so difficult for majority of them to answer, unless and until they go to a coaching institute so that they could really score the kind of work. So it's basically a skill that you develop rather than the knowledge that you develop. And therefore, if you have not developed the knowledge, you enter into IITs or IIMs of whatever kind, you have very little capacity to, in fact, solve the problem. Because I can tell you, I mean, you have fairly good amount of studies which tells you that, those who were the high rank graders, they didn't really invent much. Those who are not the high grade people, they were the ones who really changed the world. So therefore, the possibilities are at both the ends. And so the current architecture, both under whatever that is happening in the global scenario, is going to be extremely adverse for both the marginalized sections of our population. There is no way they can really catch up. There is no way they can catch up because, we are going to have a caste system again in the educational structure. We already have one. I mean, I've been saying this for ages, that for the government servants, you have one kind of a education that is central government, Kendriya Vidyalaya, and for some others, you have this Vidyalaya and that Vidyalaya. For army people, you have, where is the common man's school? Where is that public school where anybody could go and everybody could go? No, we have gradations. Unless until we correct this, we will have policies, which will say, okay, because of this policy, you see what has happened in Jharkhand. It is a news. I mean, you can check it out. Several thousand schools have been closed down because they were very small. They are considered to be extremely non-economic. Is economic parameters are going to determine the education of children living in very, very difficult terrain conditions where schools were created after so much of effort, after a lot of struggle. Now there's those schools and those, as it is, there were single teacher schools, rather than enforce further augmenting the facilities. And this is what you have in Japan. I'm not comparing India with Japan, but I'm only trying to bring in, the example of Japan, that in Japan, low density rural areas, the schools get much higher grant so that the children do not suffer. And you can check that out from their statistics. Very much higher grant. It is not unit level basis of grant, one system fits all. So there's a lot that we need to really think about and bring about corrective measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, in fact, I was also trying to ask a question related to this only. And as we also know that the digital medium of online also is leading to a lot of partisan behavior also. The society is more divisive now. So, and Sudheesh sir also rightly mentioned that character and reliability, all these personal skills are very much important. But as we also see that we also have an elite and that compartmentalization, how those who do not belong to that participate into that, because we are also argumentative Indian, but India is also the land of jugaad, so everyone looking into such shortcut, because the time frame is also so less. In fact, I before studying to JNU, myself was also looking into so many things, what to do, because the opportunity is so limited. So, sir, what was your recommendation, especially on this character and personal in life? How do we see things to join this elite club, or to have, or to follow what our interest is, and still able to hold on to where do we want to go, and simultaneously have market ready skills also. That was especially for our 20s, 30s, all the young people, those who are, because the unemployment rate of those who are graduate and above In many metros also it is going, 50% and more. So there is that a drift also, and I see that more in India, in Bangladesh, other parts also. We see many other types of industry also coming. So this aspiration and this part, and the government competitive exam is really leading in many metros, especially in Delhi. These things also happening. So especially I wanted to thought from the human resource or your personal experience part, that how do you see that we as a argumentative Indians hold our character and into the right direction? Yes.
Yeah, I'll try and keep my response brief, and I just want to take a thread from what Dr. Sinha said. In the last 10 years, I have been exposed to interviewing a lot of people across the country. Prior to this, of course, my life was in the world of the corporate, and there the kind of people I would meet were from elite institutions, already screened, selected. Whereas today I'm meeting a lot of people because of the nature of my job, which takes me to, and the kind of people that we need in our places. What comes to my mind, and this is from what I'm seeing, is it is unbelievable how many good candidates we find who are first generation learners, who are products of the Indian public school system, government schools, not even district, from the
Kendriya Vidyalaya.
The government schools. Several of them have worked so hard and got into the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, and you can see none of this would have been possible but for the steps that the government has taken over time, right? One could argue that it could have been better, etc., etc. Of course, it could have been better, but even what we are seeing in terms of the movement of people, the number of people I meet who are doing their PhDs because they had that hunger and drive for learning, and somebody in the family supported them. This would have been impossible 30 years ago, right? So there is real hard evidence on the ground of good public education resulting in upward mobility of people, right? So that's just taking a thread from what Dr. Sinha said. And to your point, Arjun, you see, it's very, very hard to say how you build these things, because we all know that these are so required, right? It's required even in the simple things that you and I do with each other. Are we trustworthy? If I say something, do I deliver to that promise? Am I responsible with money, with relationships? Now, this is built over a lifetime of learning and practice, right? And reflection. Of course, education has a part, but there are no quick fix answers to this. We have to appreciate the importance of this, continue to work at it, continue to be role models. What else can we do? Yeah.
In one way, we can perhaps help. I mean, there is no shortcuts, as you rightly pointed out. In one way that I can see things really change, characters get built bit by bit, people start reflecting upon it. When they are made to work in a larger social context and not isolate themselves just because they happen to come from a certain background. What is increasingly happening is, and I think, this blended learning is all very good, the way Nikhil was trying to point out, but with these gadgets in our palm and in our laps, we are becoming all the more atomized. We are becoming greater individuals, bigger individuals than the modern individual sociologists thought about to be. So I think, this the extent of social communication, interaction, you said, we all, and majority of them, those who have really walked a distance, if one were to say that, major transformations, both in their character and otherwise, came because, they started living on their own in hostels, and they really lived among their peers. So their first responsibility was how they really responded to their peers without much of an expectation, without much of a reward or punishment. In an organization, you have this system of being rewarded or being punished, but in a social context, what you really earn as a reward is faith, trust, and so on and so forth. And when you really cut across in your interaction, when your campuses are plural, when your campuses really have people of all kinds, you tend to really assimilate so many things. And that goes on to building your character. So it's not that the character can only be built in elite institutions, but the elite institution perhaps degenerate very soon into a kind of an insensitive group of people who cloister themselves and unapproachable, would not have the compassion. I think, one of the biggest character that one can perhaps deal with, you have to have compassion. And that compassionate feeling, the experience of being compassionate, comes through this kind of a peer group learning, rather than through any kind of a book that one reads, or any kind of a tradition of which you may be a part, or any kind of a guru or the Shishya Parampara that you may be following, or it doesn't come through the religious text. I can assure you that had it come through a religious text, all the gurus that we know of, they would have been compassionate, but they are the ones who really are not compassionate. So therefore, it doesn't come through those channels at all. So therefore, one of the biggest learning that one has to really, and that is the kind of campus, that is the kind of an interactive, whichever way we try to. Certainly, it can't be possible through kind of an online. It has to be a real world situation where you interact with people, that you will become. Yes, I mean, we are flooded with information. We get information from all over the world. But I can tell you through my own experience, very little, very small, very limited, living in a particular university for nearly 40 years that I have lived in JNU. You can say, well, this is an isolated kind of an example, but I come from a very, very small town and a very humble background, where my father won't have really been in a position to foot my education had I not gotten a scholarship. And I'd never turned back to asking for any kind of a monetary help. And that gave me the freedom that I wanted to do something, and I will do that. And this campus gave me the confidence that you want to chase your dream, you can chase your dream. And there, one of the biggest role that was performed by the scholarship. What is the amount that we really spend of our GDP on scholarships? Any kind of scholarship. What is the amount that we spend on education, for that matter? So I think, there has to be a lot of thinking again. And this is one way through which one can perhaps, no ready quick fixes, but, this is the great character develops through engagements. And it is a kind of a step-by-step. Opportunities come and you build your character. You fall into a death kind of trap, and then again you build your character. You fail and you build your character, like the Solomon and the spider.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sachi sir. And really, as Sudheesh sir was saying, Jharkhand, but none of my family members supported to do a PhD. It was all for my teachers like Sachi sir and others who kept pushing for that. So that peer learning is coming from so many of places, and being independent is really important, and cultivating character, as Sudheesh sir was saying. So we really had
That's very central. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we all look forward, especially for women also, especially because there the wonder lies as we see, especially for our economy. So, Sudheesh sir, if you want to have any parting words, otherwise we'll just have
Last word.
yeah. Simi can give a vote of thanks also. Yes.
Yeah. I just have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed preparing for this session and engaging with all of you. So I really thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I must thank you, Sudheesh ji, for sparing so much of your time and spending so much of time with us. Some of us are doing nothing. I mean, I particularly, I have all the time under the sun, and now it's evening, and therefore, I can always sit for longer time. But thanks for sparing and sharing your thoughts and your experiences. And it's wonderful. It was really great learning experience for me also. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and Sachin sir, Sudheesh sir has also edited a volume for UGC HRD that was on education. I will also try to share that with you.
Surely, I'll be very happy. I mean, I worked with Rangnekar for a particular project for some time. He's still there in the foundation. I don't know.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. So once I needed some help and I wanted to visit his talk center, so he facilitated that. Yes, I'm aware of your activities, and I've been once invited to Azim Premji Foundation, university also. Maybe after retirement, I'll go there and spend some time there with friends, right? Okay.
Yeah, many of your students are in several capacities. So
yeah, I know. Yeah.
Thank you for those kind words.
Thank you. Simi, if you
Thank you so much.
Thanks, yes.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Sachidanand Sinha, for chairing the session, and Mr. Sudheesh for sparing so much of your time. And both of your presence really added to a lot of passionate exchanges on a subject that we really feel that it should have a lot of policy suggestions, policy implications. And we hope that some of the discussions that have been made here really go up to the level of implementation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Team IMPRI, Chavi, Ms. Sharda, and Nikhil, Arjun for steering this event so well, and Ms. Anshula and Ritika. Thank you. And I really thank Counterview and Working People's Charter for being with us as partners for the event. Thank you, and I wish you a really good day and good evening.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Arjun. Thank you, Simi. Thank you,
Bye.
Sudheesh ji. Thank you.